My father's voice drifted from the kitchen low and steady. She stays out of the decisions this weekend. We already settled it. My brother's reply was muffled, but my father cut in again, sharper. If she pushes, remind her who paid for the cottage. That usually works. Hi, my name is Laura Bennett. I am 28 years old. I stood in the narrow hallway of the rented coastal cottage on the Outer Banks, the floorboards cool under my socks. The Thanksgiving weekend had barely started yet. The air already felt arranged without me. I had driven down the night before, helped unload groceries and offered to split the rental cost, the way I always did when my father insisted he would handle it. Now the low voices in the kitchen made it clear the handling had happened without me. I stepped into the doorway. My father looked up from the counter where he and Michael were leaning over a printed sheet of paper. Thomas Reed, an old family friend my father had apparently invited without mentioning it to me, sat at the small kitchen table scrolling on his phone. Laura, my father said, folding the paper in half. We were just locking in the schedule. Thomas is joining us for dinner tomorrow. Thought it would be nice to have someone from the old days. I asked when they had decided that. My father gave a small, dry smile. Last week, you were tied up at work. We didn't want to add to your plate. Michael kept his eyes on the paper. Thomas glanced up, sensing the shift, and offered a polite nod. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the one that came every time plans were presented as finished facts. I had spent 3 weeks researching cottages, comparing prices and sending links. The one we were standing in was the one I had found. Later that afternoon, I walked the beach alone, the wind sharp off the Atlantic. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Klein, my co-worker at the marketing firm. She had seen Michael show up at the office the week before and was still asking if everything was okay. I had brushed it off then. Now the memory sat heavier. Michael had appeared in the lobby without warning, asked to speak privately, and spent 20 minutes pressing me to just confirm I was coming for the full weekend and would go along with whatever Dad had planned. When I asked what exactly was planned, he had said it was nothing, just family stuff, and that pushing for details would only stress everyone out. I had agreed to come. I always agreed to come. Back at the cottage that evening, the exclusion sharpened. My father announced over takeout pizza that he and Michael had already divided the cooking for Thanksgiving. Thomas would bring wine. I was not assigned a task. When I offered to handle the pies the way I had every year we spent together, my father shook his head. You've been working long hours. Relax. Let the people who've done this before handle it. The words were delivered with the same even tone he used in business meetings. Michael nodded once, still not looking at me. Thomas watched the exchange without comment, but his expression had gone careful. I went to bed early, claiming a headache. In the small den off the living room, I opened the built-in bookshelf, looking for anything to read. An old photo album sat behind a row of paperbacks. I pulled it out and flipped through pages of family gatherings I half remembered. One photo stopped me. It was from a reunion 5 years earlier at a park near my parents' house. My father and Michael stood in the center of a group, both laughing. I was not in the frame. On the back, in my father's neat handwriting, was a short note dated from that weekend. Better without the extra voice. Michael agrees we keep these clean. She always turns simple plans into something complicated. I read it twice. The handwriting was steady. The date matched a weekend I had been told at the last minute that the gathering had been cancelled. I had believed it. I had sent a text offering to bring dessert anyway and received no reply. I slid the photo into my pocket and closed the album. My hands stayed steady, but the quiet in the cottage suddenly felt louder. The note was not new anger. It was confirmation of something older, something they had both signed on to years ago. The next morning, Thomas Reed knocked on my bedroom door before breakfast. He held 2 mugs of coffee and asked if I wanted to walk the pier with him. We had known each other since I was a teenager. He had always been the quiet adult at family events who noticed when someone was left out of the conversation. We walked in silence for a few minutes before he spoke. "Your father and Michael seem to have the whole weekend mapped out," he said. "I didn't realise you weren't part of the planning." I told him I had helped find the cottage. He nodded, then said something that landed like a small stone in still water. "Michael told me on the phone last week that your father wanted this trip to be low drama. I assumed that meant something specific." We reached the end of the pier. Thomas looked out at the grey water and added, "If you ever need someone to say they saw the same thing, I'm seeing this weekend, I'm here." I thanked him and we walked back. The offer sat with me for the rest of the morning. It was the first time anyone outside the immediate circle had noticed the pattern without me pointing it out. That afternoon, my father pulled me aside on the porch while Michael and Thomas were inside. His voice stayed low and even. "I need you to stop questioning every decision in front of Thomas. It makes the family look fractured." I asked what decision I had questioned. He gave the same small smile from the kitchen. "The cooking, the guest list, the tone you're using right now. Some of us are trying to give you a nice weekend. You could meet us halfway instead of turning every conversation into a negotiation." The words were delivered without raised volume. They did not need it. I felt the old reflex to apologize, to smooth it over, to prove I was not difficult. I swallowed it. "I paid for half of the rental," I said. I thought that earned me a voice in how the weekend went. My father's expression did not change. "You offered. I accepted because it was easier than arguing. That doesn't make you co-owner of the plans." He stepped past me and went inside. The screen door clicked shut behind him. I stayed on the porch until the cold pushed me back in. That night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I sat at the kitchen table with the photograph in front of me. The note on the back had not changed. Michael had agreed years ago that keeping me out of certain moments was cleaner. My father had written it down and kept the proof. I heard footsteps and looked up. Michael stood in the doorway, in a t-shirt and sweatpants, rubbing the back of his neck. He saw the photo before I could put it away. His face went still. "Where did you find that?" he asked. I told him. He glanced toward the hallway where our father's room was, then back at me. For a second, the careful mask slipped. "Dad keeps stuff like that," he said quietly. "He says it helps him remember why certain boundaries exist." I asked if he still agreed with what the note said. Michael looked at the floor. It was a long time ago. Things were different then. I slid the photo across the table toward him. "Then why keep it?" He did not answer. He picked up the photo, looked at the back once, and set it down again. "Laura," he said, "just let this weekend happen the way Dad wants it. It's easier for everyone." He turned and went back down the hallway. I sat at the table until the cottage was completely quiet. The note had been written 5 years earlier, but the pattern had not stopped. The generosity my father claimed paying for the cottage, organising the meals, inviting Thomas, was the same tool he had always used. It brought compliance and punished questions. I put the photo in the inside pocket of my jacket. The weight of it against my ribs felt different now. It was no longer just evidence of old exclusion. It was proof that the 2 people I had kept trying to stay close to had made an agreement to keep me at a distance, and they had written it down. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of my father on the phone again, confirming dinner details with Thomas. When I walked into the kitchen, he ended the call and smiled the same even smile. "Morning, Laura." "Sleep okay?" I said I had. Then I asked if there were any other decisions about the weekend I should know about before Thomas arrived. My father set his mug down. The smile stayed in place, but the eyes above it cooled. "I think we've covered everything," he said. "Unless you have another concern you'd like to raise in front of everyone." The sentence was polite. The warning underneath it was not. I felt the old reflex again, the one that told me to nod, to smile back, to keep the peace. I did not move. Thomas Reed's car pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later. My father went to greet him. Michael appeared from the hallway, saw me still standing at the counter, and looked away. I stayed where I was, the photograph heavy in my jacket pocket, and waited to see what the rest of the weekend would force into the open. Have you ever held proof that the people you kept showing up for had been quietly agreeing to keep you out for years? I was standing in the kitchen with that proof in my pocket, and I still had to decide whether to keep pretending I hadn't read it. Thomas Reed's car pulled into the gravel driveway just after 7. My father went out to meet him, his voice carrying the easy warmth he used with people he wanted to impress. My brother stayed in the kitchen with me for a moment longer, eyes flicking once to the pocket of my jacket. "Put it away," he said under his breath. I asked what he thought it would happen if I kept it where it was. He shook his head and walked out to help with the bags without answering. At dinner, Thomas asked how my projects at the firm were going. Before I could answer, my father spoke across the table. "Laura's been carrying a heavy load. We're giving her space from all that this weekend. No work talk." Thomas nodded, but his glance toward me was quick. My brother passed the bread without looking up. The meal moved in the rhythm my father set. Questions aimed at him, answers supplied by him. Tomorrow's schedule decided between him and Thomas while I listened. Afterward, Thomas and I ended up at the fire pit. The flames sat low against the dark. He kept his voice even. "I saw the way he answered for you at the table. It reminded me of that reunion. You weren't there. He told everyone you had a conflict at work. I never checked with you. I told him the truth. I had been told the gathering was cancelled." Thomas stared at the fire. That note on the back. Your brother was in on it even then. The confirmation from someone outside the circle made the pattern solid. It was no longer just my reading of old silences. My phone vibrated. Sarah Klein's name appeared. I stepped away from the fire to answer. She skipped pleasantries. "Your brother called the office again this afternoon. Asked if you had taken the full week or just the long weekend. Said he needed it for family planning. I told him your schedule wasn't office business." I thanked her and ended the call. The visit from the week before now carried a second layer. My brother had not only shown up in person to press me, he had followed up with my co-worker to track my time. The reach went further than the cottage. When I returned to the fire, Thomas had gone inside. My father stood on the porch, arms crossed. "Everything all right?" he asked. I said it was. He stepped closer. "I saw you talking to Thomas. If you're bringing up old family business with people who weren't there, that stops. This weekend is for the people who showed up." I asked what old business he meant. His voice stayed low. "The photo, the note, whatever version you're carrying. It was handled years ago. Leave it handled." I felt the lever move again. The cottage, the meals, the guest he had invited, without telling me every piece he had arranged, came with the same condition. Compliance bought the appearance of generosity. Questions cost it. Inside, my brother was stacking logs by the fireplace. He looked up when I entered but said nothing. My father followed and closed the door. "Laura," he said, the even tone back. Give me the photograph. We can talk about it tomorrow after Thomas leaves. Not in front of company. I kept my hand in my pocket fingers around the edge of the photo. My brother set down the last log. Dad's right. It's old. It doesn't change anything now. I looked at both of them. The note had recorded my brother's agreement. He was still standing by it. I told them I would decide what to do with it in the morning. My father's expression did not change, but the line of his shoulders tightened. Don't turn this into a scene, he said. You've always been good at that. Don't start now. The sentence landed without volume. I turned and walked to my room. The door clicked shut behind me. Through the thin walls, their voices resumed lower than before. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the photograph out. The note had not changed. Neither had the agreement it documented. I set it on the nightstand and lay down without turning off the light. I woke sometime after 2. The room was dark. The photograph was gone from the nightstand. I checked the floor, the drawer, the pocket of my jacket. Nothing. I opened the door. Voices came from the kitchen. My father's was calm. My brother's was quieter, almost pleading. Just put it back before she wakes up. She already saw it. Taking it now makes it worse. I stayed in the hallway out of sight. The cottage felt smaller than it had when I arrived. The weight that had been in my pocket was now in someone else's hands, and they were still deciding what story it would tell. I went back to my room without saying anything that night. The cottage stayed quiet, except for the low voices in the kitchen. I did not sleep much. At some point, I took my phone from the nightstand and opened the photo app. I had snapped a picture of the note right after I found it before I ever put the physical copy in my pocket. The screenshot was still there, clear and time-stamped. I saved it to a folder and put the phone face down. Morning came grey and cold. I dressed and walked to the kitchen. My father was at the stove. My brother stood at the counter with a mug. The physical photograph lay on the table between them. My father picked it up when he saw me. Laura, he said, voice even. We were just talking about returning this to where it belongs. Old things don't need to be carried around all weekend. I set my phone on the table and opened the screenshot. The note filled the screen my father's handwriting and the date 5 years earlier. My brother looked at it and went still. My father's expression did not change. That's not the original. Anyone could type something like that. Thomas Reed came in from the porch, then carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He saw the phone on the table and stopped. I read the note out loud, the same words that had been written on the back of the photograph. When I finished, I looked at my brother. You agreed with him. Then I said, the note says so. You're still agreeing now. My brother set his mug down. His voice was low. It was a different time. Dad thought it was simpler if some things stayed between us. My father cut in before he could finish. This is exactly what I meant about turning every conversation into a negotiation. Thomas doesn't need to hear old family disagreements dressed up as evidence. Thomas set the mugs down slowly. I think I do, he said. I was at that reunion. You told me Laura had a work conflict. I believed you. I never asked her. The room went quiet, except for the sound of the coffee pot clicking as it cooled. My father turned to me. The even tone was still there, but the edge underneath it had sharpened. You've made your point. Now put the phone away and let us finish breakfast. We can discuss whatever you think this means after Thomas leaves. I left the phone where it was. I'm not discussing it later, I said. I'm done pretending the generosity comes without terms. You paid for the cottage. You invited the guest. You decided the schedule. Every time I asked a question, you reminded me who covered the cost. That stops now. My brother shifted his weight. Laura, you're making this bigger than it is. I looked at him. The note has your name on it. You agreed to keep me out of moments like this. You showed up at my office and then called my co-worker to track my schedule. That's not small. That's you helping him manage me. My father set the photograph down. You're twisting things. I've always taken care of this family. That includes making sure weekends like this don't turn into arguments. Thomas spoke before I could answer. It already has, and the only person who seems surprised is you. My father's jaw tightened. He looked at Thomas, then back at me. The calculation I had seen all weekend was still there, but it no longer had the same room to move. I picked up my phone and closed the screenshot. I'm leaving after breakfast. I'll send my share of the rental cost when I get home. You can keep the rest of the weekend exactly the way you planned it. My father's voice followed me as I turned toward the hallway. You always have to make everything difficult, just like the note said. I kept walking. The words landed, but they did not stick the way they once would have. I packed the few things I had brought, left the key on the dresser, and carried my bag to the car. Thomas followed me out. If you need someone to say they saw the same thing, he said quietly, call me. I thanked him and got in the car. In the rearview mirror, I saw my father standing on the porch, arms crossed, watching me leave. My brother stayed inside. The cottage looked smaller as I drove away. On the drive back, I called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. You okay? She asked. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, You don't owe them silence anymore. You never did. The words sat with me for the rest of the drive. By the time I reached my apartment, the light had changed. I unpacked, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with the screenshot still open on my phone. The note had not changed. Neither had the agreement it recorded. But I had. I spent the next week sorting through what the weekend had made clear. The pattern had not started with the cottage or the note. It had started years earlier, every time my father arranged something and then used the cost or the effort as the reason I should not question it. My brother had gone along because it was easier. I had gone along because I kept believing that if I helped enough, if I stayed quiet enough, I would eventually be let inside the decisions instead of managed around them. That belief ended on the drive home. I stopped answering the group texts about future holidays. When my father called 2 weeks later and asked if I was still upset about the weekend, I told him I was not upset. I was finished. He tried the same even tone he had used at the cottage. You're making a mistake, he said. Family doesn't walk away over one old photograph. I told him the photograph was not the mistake. The agreement written on the back of it was, and I was no longer participating in it. He hung up without saying goodbye. My brother sent one text the next day, Dad's angry. Maybe give it time. I did not reply. 3 months later, Thomas Reed called. He had been at another family event and had asked my father directly why I was not there. My father had given the same answer he always gave. I was busy with work. Thomas had told him he knew that was not true. The conversation had not gone well, but Thomas said he wanted me to know someone else had seen it. I thanked him and hung up. The call did not change anything about the choice I had already made. It only confirmed that the choice was mine to keep making. I still see my brother occasionally, usually at neutral places, and never for full weekends. He does not bring up the note or the cottage. I do not ask him to choose sides out loud. The agreement he once signed onto with a nod and a signature on the back of a photograph no longer binds me. He can carry it if he wants to. I have put it down. My father and I speak only when necessary, and only about practical things. He no longer offers to handle events I am invited to. I no longer accept the handling. The generosity that once came with reminders of who paid stopped being offered, and I stopped expecting it. What remains is the clear line I drew that morning in the cottage kitchen. I will not be managed out of my own life, and then blamed for noticing the management. The sense of being truly included was never there to lose. What I lost was the habit of pretending it might appear if I stayed quiet long enough. What I kept was the ability to walk away when the pretense became too expensive. That is the new chapter. It is built on the simple fact that I no longer owe anyone my silence in exchange for a seat at a table that was never set for me. Thank you for listening to my story. If your family has spent years writing you out of the plans and then calling it protection, what would it take for you to stop waiting for an invitation that was never going to come?